I'm Alan Robarge, a relationship coach. Welcome to Improve Your Relationships, where I like to talk about attachment injuries and healing from attachment trauma. And for this audio video recording, I want to talk about crying all the time, nonstop crying, a struggle, specifically after a relationship ends, after a period of a breakup. The relationship has, you are now on your own and you're going through this grief process and you're finding the degree, the intensity, the amount of grief feels so incredibly overwhelming in many ways that you are coming undone or you have come undone. And there's an aspect of it can feel satisfying to participate in the intensity of the grief because it affirms how important the relationship is and or was to you. It affirms the depth of the hurt or acknowledges caring so deeply for the other person. At the same time, it can be alarming. It can feel very alarming to notice how you just can't control it. It's very possible you're at work and you have to take a break and you have to run out to leave work, go in the bathroom and cry. Sometimes you're finding yourself at home watching a TV commercial about Kleenex or something that is in a Hallmark card commercial, and you just lose it. Or you're in the car, you're driving somewhere, and you happen to drive by something that reminds you of your previous relationship, and that serves as a trigger to activate your mind. And then there's a profound sense of loss that floods in, and yet again you're crying. So I want to address and talk about this alarming feeling. We could even have moments when this happens of feeling crazy, like, oh no, is something really going on? Like I'm losing my mind. And that can be disorienting, that can be scary. So I'm talking in terms of layers here. There's the layer of the actual experience that the relationship is over. It's understandable that there's grief. It's understandable that you're grieving. And then you also have this observer self that you're able to look outside of the process, and you're observing and saying, oh, wow, this is really a big deal. This is actually usurping your clarity of mind. It's taking over your life, and that it's a full-time job to grieve this relationship. And we derive a sense of comfort from comparing ourselves to other people, that we have had friends or family members, or assume you have had a couple friends or family members who you have witnessed or observed their grief or how they have ended a relationship. And perhaps they appeared to maneuver through the process with less intensity, perhaps a little more grace, perhaps a little more skillfulness. And so when we take in that feedback to observe how other people grieve relationships, we might look at ourselves and think, wow, this one is hitting me much harder than how other people seem to grieve. And so that's what I mean by layers. We now have these different layers where I'm looking at just at face value the actual grief and the grieving and the loss and the breakup. But now I'm also monitoring, and I have a secondary emotional response. My secondary feeling is one of fear, like I'm fearing my own grief, like, oh no, am I losing my mind? Like, this is just so incredibly painful. It's also possible you're having some body reaction, body sensation, some somatic experience. For some people, their body starts shaking when they're grieving. You might find even your solar plexus, your diaphragm in your chest is vibrating, and sometimes that can even sort of protrude and be visible. the your heart racing, sweaty palms, feeling anxious, feeling panicky, and entering this world of grief where the everyday world as you know it, you disconnect from the everyday world. What I like to say, what I call it, is entering a realm. And so you enter this realm of grief, and when the breakup, when the divorce, when the end of the marriage, the end of the relationship is so immediate, it's as if we cannot function in the regular world. We cannot function in the usual realm that our mind occupies. We seem to get sucked into this grief realm where everything is just so much more intense and crushing and painful. And there's a repetitive mulling over of details, this preoccupied mind, this hyper vigilant mind, this hyper aroused mind, this hyper thinking mind of telling yourself the story, of trying to go through the details. I can remember a time when I was in this state and I needed to go to the grocery store, and I could not function in the grocery store for more than 5 minutes. I was just so overwhelmed. First of all, it was the store. I don't know if you've had this experience, but if you go to any type of big box store like Home Depot or Walmart or Target, and a grocery store can be a similar place where there's just sensory overload with so many things on the shelf, and the particular lighting can feel unwelcoming and feel intrusive. And there's a transientness to everyone busy, busy, busy buying their groceries, doing their thing. And to be there can feel so alienating. For me, also in that moment, the grocery store represented a shared home and a domestic life, and buying groceries with a partner, planning meals, even if I'm planning it, for myself, but going to share it with a partner, that reinforces the connection, that reinforces the relationship, that reinforces the emotional warmth of being in relationship. And so the grocery store itself, shopping for groceries, represented the loss of domestic life and the loss of caring about what someone else is going to eat, and or someone inquiring and caring about what I'm going to eat. And there's so much of social activity and engagement around food and planning. So I'm just using this as an example. Being in the grocery store was this trigger and a entry point to return or to activate being in this realm of grief. And for some of us, we just get so crushed, and that in a way our mind throws us into this grief realm, this grief world, and we are gone. We are living in that place for an extended period of time. Our state of mind is now one that's consumed by grief. So initially, for the point of this audio video recording, is to just normalize, to let you know you're not the only person who has entered a state of mind that is consumed and preoccupied with grief. Now, there are many books, there are many poems, there are many writers throughout history who have acknowledged this, and there's some comfort to acknowledge. Oftentimes, it taps into what could be called a conversion experience or a transcendent experience. There's something abrasively honest, there's something shockingly honest about grief. That there's no bullshit in this place. It is very direct, and it can be a period of, actually, it's the opposite of confusion, which I'm going to speak a little bit about a paradox. We're going to feel upside down, and we're going to feel like life is not able to move forward as usual. We might find ourselves not being able to think clearly. We'll change our eating habits, we'll change our sleeping habits. But simultaneously, the paradox is that even though there's this profound emotional confusion and trying to make sense of what happened in the relationship and how did we get to this place where we've ended, there's also this other quality, this simultaneous awareness of this profound honesty that brings with it a no-nonsense slap in the face. It's a very refreshing, I say that in quotes, sometimes it's a bit of a, sometimes it's not refreshing. It could be so hurtful and painful, but it has this honesty, this no bullshit quality of looking at your life and examining your life. There's a Rumi poem, and the poem is Bird Wings, and the first line says, your grief lifts a mirror to where you're bravely working. And so that's the honest quality, a kind of abrasive honesty. That's hard to swallow the truth, but there's this mirror. And when we're living in this realm and we're simultaneously being crushed by the pain and the discomfort and feeling like we're coming undone and simultaneously having panic attacks and not being able to go to work for needing to be late, and you're sitting in your car crying or whatever it is. But we also are going to notice these profound nuggets of insight, these moments where we're looking in the mirror, we're looking at our life, we're looking at reality a little differently. And in a way, it's like the grief realm also provides the benefit of some incredible clarity and some incredible depth of seeing. And this is the place of the transformation. This is how it's what in spiritual lingo would be referred to as a conversion experience, because it's in the clarity of that laser-like seeing, the laser-like looking of being able to look into the mirror of who you have been, who you are, and who you're becoming. And oftentimes that's so confrontational and can be scary. So again, to repeat this idea of layers, I mean, it's scary to end a relationship and to be alone. It's scary to have to feel the pain of the grief. It's scary to enter the realm of grief and to experience it 24/7, where you question yourself, what the heck is going on here? And now, on top of it, it is also scary that it brings with this mirror that is going to reflect back to you who you've been, who you are, and who you're becoming, and allow you to do some incredible life review. And that life review will bring in some profound regrets, and it could be healthy regrets. If you don't have a solid foundation of being able to stay rooted in the maturity of life review, the maturity of healthy regrets, it's going to leak into, there might be a flood of shame and a flood of guilt. And it's really challenging. In that sense, it's like whitewater rafting. You're in the boat on the river, and you're trying to maneuver through, flowing through the river of healthy regrets. But sometimes you're going to get these huge waves, these whitewater rapids of shame and whitewater rapids of guilt coming at you. And then in that moment, it's not about making sense and deepening in your understanding of the life review. It's trying to have a boundary to work with the shame so that it doesn't implode on you. Just to clarify, also, there's a standard definition for shame is to think of it in terms of there's something fundamentally wrong with me, and I'm embarrassed of who I am as a human being, and that I feel that I'm flawed. So it's attacking shame. Shame is a way of thinking that is attacking my worth, and I feel shame around how I'm experiencing me in the context of this relationship ending, or in the context of something I said or something I did. There's also this idea of healthy shame, and that's where I take liberties and I introduce the idea of calling it healthy regrets. This under the necessity to review your life and say, I often refer to it as the Britney Spears school of therapeutic intervention of "Oops, I did it again." We see the pattern, and like the song, Britney Spears has a song that says "Oops, I did it again." We notice these patterns, and over time, if we can notice the degree to which we keep choosing something that's unhealthy, we keep choosing something that's dysfunctional, we keep choosing toxic relating, we keep choosing partners who do not have the skill to engage emotional awareness, emotional attunement, emotional openness, and then nonetheless we force ourselves to stay to try to pretend we can either change the other person or that we are going to somehow morph ourselves and change ourselves. That is a form of betrayal. We then have this self-betrayal. And to look at that from a healthy perspective, there's or an honest perspective, to have the mirror of grief mirror back to us how we have been in a relationship where we've denied our sense of self and we've betrayed ourselves. We look in the honest mirror of grief, and what it mirrors back to us is this pattern of self-betrayal, and it mirrors back to us we've betrayed ourselves. And there's healthy regret there. Now, if my mind gets sucked into shame, a toxic shame, it's going to draw the conclusion that there's something wrong with me, I'm unworthy, I'm just a mess of a person, that my worth is called into question for no other reason than the fact that I've done this, that I've betrayed myself. So it's a little bit of a sophisticated work. It's challenging to use grief and grieving as a cleansing vehicle, as a cleansing tool to help you evolve, mature, and grow. And of course, I don't quite know how the workings of the mind, how the mind works. But there seems to be something about this function of grieving that is our mind's natural healing ability. And even if we adopt the word, spirituality, there's some kind of spiritual function. And our mind, the healing and grieving allows us to transform and evolve and to come into different versions of ourselves, and usually that means better versions of ourselves, or deeper, more aware versions of ourselves. And as you're doing this, you might be noticing these patterns of your shortcomings, and the idea is to fully embrace it as a shortcoming of behavior and to not use it as evidence against yourself in a judgmental way. So let's return to just the reality of what I'm calling crying all the time. And I often hear this from clients. I often hear it from people who contact me for relationship coaching. I'll receive an email and someone will say, "Please help me. I can't stop crying. I'm crying all the time." So let's talk about some of the reasons of where that this is coming from. One possibility is that you're tapping into unresolved childhood grief, and that if you lived your life in your family and lived your life growing up where relationships were never fully safe or never fully realized, whether you were conscious of it or not, there was a quality to really hoping that one day your parent will really be able to engage with you, to know you, Maybe even for you, it's the phrase to love you, to feel loved, to feel safe, to feel trust, to feel that your parent is there for you. And so if you did not have this, and now you're an adult and this current relationship has ended, it's very possible what's happening is you're tapping into the unresolved childhood grief of holding out for the hope of one day achieving, arriving, being able to enter the security of finally being loved, finally being seen, known, heard, finally being understood in the way that you always believed was possible. And unfortunately, that has not happened with your family. And then, unfortunately, the current relationship, even if you had glimpses of it, even if it happened, and then now it's over and ended, it's possible that the degree, the intensity of the grief that you're feeling is a link, a direct link to the unresolved grief from your childhood relationships in your family. One way we can assess this, and again, of course, I don't know. How do I know? It's your mind. It's your complex psyche, your complex mind. But one assessment tool we can use has to do with congruence, has to do with looking at, well, what is actually happening here today, right in front of me, and then what is it congruent with my emotional response? And again, I will use myself as an example that over the years, it became very apparent to me that when relationships would end, I was a mess. I mean, I use the phrase, I get run over by a truck. So a relationship ends, or even before it ends, I anticipate it's starting to end. The signs are there, and I start freaking out, and I feel horrible. And then it ends, and I'm run over by a truck. The grief truck comes through, and I can be devastated. I can, similar to what we're talking about on this video, I'm crying every day. I mean, there have been periods in my adult life where I cried for months and months. I think I forget the number now. I feel like over the years I exaggerate. So maybe but I feel like, the numbers, there was a period of time I was living in Chicago, and I would say, like, for 3 months, for 3 or 4 months, I monitored it, and days and weeks kept passing, and I feel like it went on for like 3 months straight. For 3 to 4 months, I'm like crying every day. I was such a mess. So that was not the only time that happened. So as I see the pattern, and I realize, oh wow, any relationship ends and I'm just devastated and wiped out. What the heck is going on? Why does this seem so life or death to me? And why do I decompensate or spiral into such profound suffering when a relationship ends? Because the phrase or the idea of a relationship ending, let's all be honest here, it's not that shocking. I mean, it's really not shocking. I mean, that's normal. We're talking about a normal reality. Relationships begin, relationships end. Relationships begin, relationships end. Relationships come and go, they start, they finish. There's nothing shocking about this. But when it seems to happen to me, my whole world goes from color to black and white. My whole world unravels. So over time, I had my observer self about me, and I'm observing this process, and I could notice the incongruency to say, this particular relationship that I'm grieving, the particular story, the person, where I'm at, my age and my life, and all the details that go into making up, there is something else going on. Because crying every day and feeling like I have just been crushed by a truck run over by a truck. There's something else going on here. This cannot, the intensity of the presentation and the intensity of how I am experiencing this emotional reality does not feel rooted in the current reality. It feels like it's linking to something else. And this was really a door opening for me. This really helped me. And the interesting thing, and this might not be true for everybody, but for me, for whatever, my psyche cannot link to childhood very easily. And I'm not talking about not having memories. I actually have a very good memory. I have very clear memories. I have very specific memories. But this grief, I can't, it's like my brain, what I've learned over the years, my brain needs the current relationship, the current object, the other person is the object, the current feelings of love, the current loss of this relationship, to serve as a conduit, a vehicle, a stand-in, a replacement for the childhood grief. So I'm able to grow, mature, process through the grief when I'm focused on the current situation of the current person and myself, and this happened and that happened. And it feels very alive. It feels very energized. It feels pertinent. However, in that moment, if I remind myself and say, well, this level of intense grief is actually linking to childhood, let's grieve childhood. Oftentimes when I do that, the grief does not move or does not activate. And the reason that I have come up for why this is because for many of us are grieving what did not happen. So hear the paradox in that, or just hear the confusion. It's like I'm grieving memories that never happened. I'm grieving a relationship that never happened. So it's totally logical then that my brain cannot latch on to any story or any real context from the past to make it link and pertinent to the past. The only thing I have to go on as an assessment tool or from a logical perspective is what I've already said, in that the grief is so incongruent with the current situation that it points to there's something else happening here that is allowing this grief to flood in. And in many ways, for me, because I have also looked at my family history and looked at my relationship with family members, I have been able to say, well, this actually all totally makes sense. And I can feel the longing, the childhood longing to be in relationship with family that never happened. And the only way that that grief surfaces is when it is allowed to communicate or leak through the current loss, the current situation. Another added level to understand this is if we think in terms of attachment trauma, and we think of trauma as brain functioning, it's very possible that what's simultaneously happening is that trauma is getting activated and triggered, and a whole host of hormones are flooding your nervous system, and they are exaggerating and accentuating the intensity of what's going on. So I don't want to discredit what I just said, that from a psychodynamic perspective, from a historical psychological perspective, from a developmental healing perspective, we can say, yes, there's some history, some unresolved grief from childhood leaking into the current grief, and it's creating this lovely, milkshake, or a big swirl, a big swirled mess of grief that now you're swimming in, or you're floating in, and you're trying to make sense of. Let's put an added layer that it could also, I like the phrase, we turn the volume up. Our mind amplifies, our mind intensifies seeing what's going on and experiencing the intensity when there's also unresolved trauma energy looping in the nervous system. And what this would mean is that if we have attachment injuries that have coded in our brain as an unresolved trauma, an unintegrated trauma, that any type of loss, the end of the relationship, is going to trigger the abandonment trauma, is going to trigger the attachment trauma around being rejected, being abandoned, being now alone. And if you have some history of growing up, usually again in your family, where you experienced a certain level of abandonment or neglect or being ignored, this relationship ending is going to provoke your brain functioning, your brain mapping, provoke your nervous system, and it's going to register in your body as life or death. That it registers as a survival response, so that trauma, if we were abandoned and the current relationship ends, but we perceive it as something akin to an abandonment, even though we're two adults ending a relationship, we're two adults living our life able to end a relationship, nonetheless, our brain perceives it as this is an abandonment. And so now this trauma energy is triggered, and that is going to enhance the grief that we're feeling. And it's so painful. And this also, then we find ourselves crying every day, crying constantly. What is going on? Why is this happening? Another idea I want to share, it's somewhat linked to this childhood idea of unresolved childhood grief. But we can think in terms of a family system, that we came from a family, we have a culture, the family culture. And if we think in terms of collective energy, collective memory, collective experience, that there's not just the individual person who we call mom, there's not just the individual person that we call dad, and then we have the brothers and sisters, and we have the other extent. If we lump everybody together as just family, and we have a history, and we have memories, and we have belief systems and values, and if we think of this as a whole functioning system, and at one point we were really immersed in that system, and maybe you're still immersed in your family system. Many people create distance and pull themselves out of that family system. But it's possible that collectively, when the family had some dysfunction, some toxicity, some level of stress, struggle, and pain and tension, that there's a collective grief. There's the family grief. So it's not just mom's grief. It's not just dad's grief. It's not just your grief. It's together. There's in this field of energy, in the energy field, the system itself is holding grief. And just as a quick side note, we can also acknowledge the system holds anger, the system holds shame, the system holds embarrassment, the system holds ignorance. And when we start thinking from this system's perspective, we notice how certain family members can be the channel, the release valve for the collective energy or the collective emotional state that is happening. An easy example here has to do with anger. Let's say you have a family, there's tension, there's anger, But anger is not being expressed directly. It's not being expressed honestly. It's not being expressed in a way to protect other family members and for the sake of healing and for the sake of consciousness. It's just being swept under the rug. It's coming out sideways. People are insulting each other. People are arguing with each other. So you have this anger that's just floating around in the room. And this anger that's like this cloud of energy, this cloud of anger that's just following people around. Well, usually what happens is there's going to be a family member who unconsciously has the role, sometimes it's even conscious, but there's going to be a family member who's going to be the stress relief or the tension relief, who is the one who controls the valve to release the family anger. So what this means is this person in the family system they have a job, and their job is to be responsible for releasing anger for everybody. It's this person's job to express anger for everybody. So now we get the anger. This family member is the angry one. He or she gets the label that, that family member is angry and is the loud one, is the one who creates, all of this ruckus and creates drama and is yelling at everyone. It's very possible, for the sake of what I'm trying to describe in this dynamic, that the person is expressing anger for 8 people. It is not just his or her anger. It is not just his or her personal anger. He or she has a function in the family system to help purge the system of too much anger. And so it will build and build and build. And because mom is not owning her anger, it's still floating in the room. And dad is not being direct to own his anger and speak to it in a constructive way. It's still floating in the room. And the children are fighting with each other, and they're all upset how mom and dad are ignoring them. And that anger's in the room. And aunts and uncles have, unresolved conflicts that are not being addressed. And so that historical anger is floating. And then there's the one person who it's his or her job to express the anger, and then they serve the function of releasing it. So I use that example to apply it to grief, and that it's very possible that what you're tapping into is a legacy of unresolved family grief that, by right of the current relationship ending, and knowing that you're also now grieving childhood relationships that were strained or stressed or never quite culminated in a level of connection that you needed, it can put you back into contact with this energetic field of grief, collective grief that is the family grief. And so in those moments, you're not just grieving your own life, you're now grieving for the family. And you're grieving some of this legacy, and you're grieving mom and dad's unresolved grief. You're grieving mom and dad's grief for not having been able to be in relationship with you the way they perhaps would have liked or hoped for. And for whatever limitations that there had been, that you can, through your own compassion and your ability of empathy, you're tapping into now grieving other people's grief. And this can be so incredibly confusing, that you're already trying to manage the crushing grief of the relationship ending, but now you're intensifying it because your mind is linking to the family system, and now you're channeling the grief of the family system. One more idea that I want to add to that is everything I just described with your family system and grieving the family system our mind has the ability to tap into other people's family system or other people's grief as well, even those who are outside of our family. And what I'm talking about is this ability to feel another person's feelings. Yes, this is empathy. There seems to be a additional dropping into a kind of a deeper level of empathy where we somatically feel in our body the experience of another person. Some of this is the result of having grown up in an environment where you were not able to be yourself and you needed to be hyper vigilant or hyper aware of other people's well-being, and you took on monitoring as if you're a barometer of someone else's well-being. An easy example here of how this happens could be a family member who's depressed. And if so much is dependent on the overall well-being of the home or the environment is dependent on if the depressed person, let's pretend it's a parent, and in this moment we're going to say the father is depressed. If the father is depressed, everyone in the family is invested in monitoring, is it a good day or is it a bad day? Everyone in the family is invested in, is dad able to be engaged beyond his depression in order to function in a way that reassures us that we're all good and we're all safe and we're all having a good time. And if dad is grumpy, if dad is sad, if dad is lethargic, if dad is apathetic, if dad is checked out, this will create tension in the marriage. This will create tension in the relationships with the kids. And then also, if it even goes in the direction, let's say dad's way of coping with his depression is through self-medication of drinking or any other type of substance, then what's going to happen is the family notices, oh wow, in addition to the depression and the sadness and the weight of noticing how dad disconnects, now he's also drinking more, and then the behaviors around drinking can also create distress and create uncertainty. So everyone, and let me add one more thing here. Let's also add, let's say dad is not a good drunk, dad is an angry drunk. And so now, so dad's depressed, dad drinks sometimes, and then in addition, now we have to put up with his outbursts of rage and his outburst of frustration because his life is a mess and he's unable to attend to his own life. And so now everyone is held prisoner in this dynamic of dad's mood and dad's state of mind, dad's, whatever is going on for dad. And this trains us to be codependent. This is codependency 101, which is to be overly focused on another person's state of mind, overly focused on another person, period. But we could say overly focused on another person's well-being. So if dad is not doing that well, our nervous system is designed to activate and to say, emergency, something's going on with dad. He's very angry. He's creating tension in the house. People do not feel safe and comfortable. This is not fun. The environment is not fun. And so our nervous system is being trained, and I'm speaking about this from the point of view of the kids in the home, but it could also be, you could already be the spouse, you could be an adult in this situation. Your nervous system becomes very hyper vigilant and hyper aroused around the other person's well-being. And we realize that I need to do some things to help safeguard taking care of the other person. And if I can take care of dad's depression, and if I could take care of making sure that he stays engaged, well, that is going to very much allow me to train myself to not look at myself. So I gave that big example. If I'm in what I'm talking about is that if we can tap into a family system where we're grieving the family's grief, and we have this ability from our history to be overly concerned about others, where our nervous system and mind was trained to be hyper vigilant and focused on another person's experience. It's very possible we could tap into our current ex-partner's life, and now we're grieving his or her life as well. And many people have shared with me this experience. It's almost psychic. It almost feels, it's this weird spiritual intuitive feeling that you can drop into the other person's suffering. Now, some of this is your mind playing tricks on you. Some of it, there's a certain percentage that says, no, this is not happening. Your mind is very sophisticated, and because you do not have a sense of self, you're so enmeshed with the other person that your mind is scripting the experience in such a way that you believe that you're feeling the other person's pain and suffering and grief, and in fact, you're not. I, in this moment, am not going to create such a rigid, absolute statement because, number one, how do I know if that is or isn't true? But I do believe, considering these, I feel pretty confident saying I know how to tap into collective grief of a family system. That I do think that there's something about this function of mind, the function of empathy, that I can tap into an ex-partner's experience. And I think that there's something going on beyond my own brain manufacturing an imaginary compassion or an imaginary grief of the other person's experience. So take that particular one with, use your own discernment of whether or not that does or doesn't resonate with you. But the whole point of all of these examples that I'm giving is to try to put into context and to make sense that why you're crying every day is very possible that you're not just crying your own tears, you're crying other people's tears as well. I hope that this audio recording, this video in an audio format is helpful to you. I hope these ideas just give you a little bit of comfort to say, no, you're not crazy. Yes, it makes sense you're crying every day. It will stop at some point. It might go on for months and months. I totally understand that you could be coming undone and feeling like you're really losing your marbles, which is sort of the last thing I want to say is that, well, maybe you are losing your marbles and there's a little more going on here than in what I've already shared. So please keep in mind that this could that the loss of a relationship and the intensity of the grief from the loss of that relationship can be a catalyst or a gateway experience to provoke certain states of mind or to provoke mental illness or to provoke instability in your mind. And if that's the case, there's a little more going on here than just grieving a relationship. And if you think that is the case, or you need to find out if there's more going on here, by all means, please see a therapist, please see a professional counselor, see a psychiatrist, talk to someone who can do an assessment and figure out, what is actually going on. I do offer this other framework to realize for you to think about what is the source of all this grief, and you might be grieving more than just this relationship, just the end of this relationship, albeit very painful and very life-changing. it's very possible that the intensity and the amount of grief that you're experiencing is coming from all of these other sources. And the purpose of this recording is for you to begin to think about, well, what are all of these other sources? And perhaps there's some others that I haven't even mentioned yet that you can review for yourself and think about in your own life. There might be some other avenues of grief that you're channeling simultaneously, which is linking up with the current immediacy of the grief around the loss of the relationship. And then you're getting this wonderful, lovely cocktail. I like to call it the mental health cocktail that is just really, really impacting your state of mind, and you're feeling it so intensely. It is painful. It is a full-time job. You're not going to be able to do business as usual. Your life is going to fall apart, and you have got to attend to this grief. So empathy to you, time to learn some skills, time to be an attendant and take care. You're entering grief world. You're entering the skill of grieving. You're entering grief where you need to use some skills, and if you don't have those skills, you got to take a very practical approach and get a piece of paper and a pen and write, skills at the top of that page. And you have to begin to make what are your grieving skills? If you don't have them, how do you get them? How do you use them? Because right now, if you are in the place that I'm referring to, you need some resources. You need some tools in your tool bag to work with this, because it is just going to kick your butt, 24/7. It's a really intense period of time. And the purpose of this recording is to say, I know it's intense. Empathy to you. You can begin to map out understanding what's going on, and you need to be intelligent about getting some skills, using your resources to work with, to be able to move through the grief in a way that is not just crushing you, but allowing you to transform and evolve and move through this as a healing process. So not as a stuck process, but as a healing process that has movement. I hope that this was helpful. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel if you like this video and you want to hear more just like it coming up real soon in the future. And then lastly, to learn more about me, please go to alanrobarge.com. And that's my website. There's some information there if that interests you. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next time.